Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. I'm Shirley Bloomfield, your host today for this discussion. I'm the CEO of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. NTCA is the premier association. We represent about 850 community-based telecommunication providers all across the country, particularly serving rural and small town America. Our members are leading the charge to bridge the digital divide, delivering really robust and high quality broadband service over future-proof networks. And they have this living, breathing commitment to making sure that their communities stay connected. And that enables so many really important things when we talk about commerce and healthcare and education and agriculture, and so many things we probably hadn't even thought of before the pandemic. I'm really excited to be joining you all today, and it is my honor to be speaking with a couple of our panelists that I'm going to be introducing all of you to. We have Gigi Son, who is a distinguished fellow at the Georgetown Law Institute for Technology, Law and Policy, also a former FCC senior staff person. We have Catherine Nicolau, who is the External Affairs and Marketing Manager for Sacred Wind Communications in the beautiful state of New Mexico, and Seth Arndorfer, who's the CEO of Dakota Carrier Network, up in bright and chilly North Dakota. So what we're going to be doing today is we've got an eye-opening panel called The Rural Renaissance, How Diverse Communities Get Connected and Why It Actually Matters. So my thanks to the organizers and the team at the Non-Obvious Company for actually hosting this discussion here today. I do want to go ahead and before we get started, I'd like to just take a moment and reflect upon the history of the indigenous lands that we call home. While we're meeting here today on a virtual platform, all of us occupy spaces that carry the powerful legacy of those diverse peoples and their unique local cultures. Through this acknowledgement, we reaffirm a deep commitment to improving our understanding of America's shared heritage and recognize our collective responsibility to improving the bonds between all nations, probably more important now than ever. We're really grateful for this opportunity to meet you wherever you may be on your journey towards looking and working towards a diverse and inclusive society so we can do all of this work together. What I'd like to do, because my panelists have such an interesting perspective, I'm going to have them all do a flash hot round of a little bit more of who they are. So Gigi, I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
Well, thanks, Shirley. It's great to be here. This seems like an amazing conference. I am a longtime consumer advocate for open, affordable, and available broadband that supports democratic values, the ability to speak and be heard, to engage in civic life. So that's what I've done in my whole life. I've tried to promote policies that promote universal, affordable communications networks, be they broadband, broadcast, cable, so on and so forth. And I did have the privilege of working for Tom Wheeler, Chairman Tom Wheeler, as his counselor from 2013 to 2016, where we strengthened the Lifeline program. We strengthened what at the time was called the Connect America Fund. It's now called the Rural Digital Opportunities Fund. It seems to change names every year. We strengthened the E-rate program, which is the program that provides broadband to schools and libraries. So we modernized all of them. And we ensured that consumers were protected and competition was promoted. So it was a great time in my life. Unfortunately, the current FCC reversed a lot of what we did. And what I hope to talk about today is how we can, really close the digital divide as opposed to just talk about it for a press release.
Excellent. Thank you, Gigi. Catherine, a little bit about you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Shirley, for inviting Sacred Wind to have a voice at this summit. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been in telecommunications only for 4 years, but I am part of an organization that is called Sacred Wind Communications. We operate in the state of New Mexico. I do marketing and external affairs for the company. So I get the message out in terms of what it is like to operate in such a hard to reach area on tribal lands. The majority of our customers are Navajo families. And so I really look forward to talking about the subject of diversity. Obviously, telecommunications connects people. It gives people a voice. One of the things that our CEO says is that, and this particularly prior to the pandemic, not a lot of people woke up on a daily basis worrying about rural America. since the pandemic, more and more people wake up and say, what can we do for rural America? And Sacred Wind has built a model for providing broadband service in rural America. So I'm excited to discuss that.
Great, thank you. All right, Seth, last but never least, love to hear yours.
Well, I first of all, thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation today about diversity. I was just saying earlier today that I speak often about technology and how we've closed the digital divide in North Dakota, but this is really the first opportunity that I've had to participate in a conversation that can sometimes be really sensitive. And I just really am looking forward to that. I've had a lot of great conversations with my team about inclusion, diversity, why we do what we do, and looking forward to that. A little bit about my background. I'm a fourth generation farm kid from the most rural area in North Dakota. So from a diversity perspective growing up, I really didn't experience it a lot. Most of our neighbors all migrated here together, and it was all part of the Homesteading Act. And so we still have the homestead. And so it's amazing how much awareness we have today. We have room for growth, but how much progress we have made, especially, I can speak personally in North Dakota when it comes to diversity and awareness, like what I talk about with my kids.
Excellent, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and set the bar. So I think all of you feel pretty passionately about broadband, about connectivity, about why it matters to all Americans. And for those, to Catherine's point, who didn't think about it before the pandemic, are certainly very focused on how important, how critical, frankly, it is that we connect people. And what I'd love to ask each one of you to kind of share a little bit about, Seth and Catherine, you both represent carriers in some of our nation's most rural areas. Really love to have you speak to the importance of getting folks connected. And Gigi, you've looked at it from a national perspective and have this sense of why it is so important that people have access, connectivity, the ability to actually connect us as a nation. So I'm going to go ahead and Catherine, start with you, talking a little bit about why it is so important to get these rural customers connected.
Thank you. For us, for Sacred Wind, what our mission is providing equality of opportunity. And when we talk about equality of opportunity, we really mean giving individuals the opportunity to participate in society. The pursuit of happiness as Americans should not only belong to those living in large cities. It should belong to anybody, wherever you live in this beautiful country. And so to give you an idea of the type of service territory that we operate in, because even our territory is quite diverse in the way that we encounter different mountain ridges, different type of territory, which historically has made it more difficult to provide service in. But Sacred Wind doesn't let that deter us because of our mission, because our mission is to provide equality of opportunity. So there are hogbacks, ridges, volcanic cliffs everywhere. We encounter flat desert, pine forest, canyons, which make it very difficult to get to reach homes. But reaching rural customers, it's about finding the doctors. It's about finding the engineers, future engineers, about finding future presidents of this country that might reside in rural areas. So connecting children in rural areas is about bridging or closing that homework gap, allowing adults to learn computer skills, apply for jobs, pursue an education. These are all wonderful, beautiful stories that we have heard and experienced with our own customers.
So Seth, North Dakota, a little bit different geography, but tell us a little bit about some of your challenges.
Sure. Well, in North Dakota, DCN is a really unique business model. We're made up of 14 rural broadband service providers that serve the very remote areas in the state. Most of it's rolling plains, but we do have badlands and a really small mountain range. But what broadband means to North Dakotans in a lot of cases, because we do have a lot of agriculture, it's really the connectivity allows them to, I'm going to stop for really a quick second. I'm getting a lot of feedback, so if everybody could mute. it allows us to connect these farmers, and the business case and the cost, the input costs for these farmers continue to grow. And by having broadband, it allows them to sometimes have a second or a third income. Maybe their spouse can have a job and they can have a second job when they're not in their busy season. So from an economic impact, it's been critical. From an educational standpoint, with COVID, it really became even magnified, but just even despite COVID, it allows students to do their homework and to study from the farm without having to drive into town each night to maybe a public library or a public Wi-Fi hotspot to do their homework. So that really was life-changing. And then for the elderly, we are an aging population in North Dakota. My grandmother's 98 years old, and she's still able to live on the family farm because she has access to remote telehealth services. She can log in and establish a chat with our doctor that's 30 miles away in the small town that we live next to, and check in with them and get her vitals and make sure that everything is okay. And it's truly, from a quality of life standpoint, has changed and allowed her to live and enjoy her home that many more years.
Thank you. And Gigi, you've had the ability to see this from, the importance of connectivity from a national perspective and certainly from a policymaking perspective. So love to hear kind of your gut about why it's so important.
Well, Shirley, you and I have known for years that in order to fully participate in U.S. society, in our economy, in our healthcare system, in our culture, in our civic life, you have to have connectivity, and not just any connectivity, robust connectivity. Nowadays, particularly, with COVID here, it's not enough to have, 25 megabits per second download speed, 3 upload speed, which is unfortunately the FCC's definition of broadband. You've got to have much more than that. And it was amazing to me, almost as soon as the pandemic started, I started getting flooded with phone calls from press, not realizing how many people in this country, tens of millions, don't have broadband. So, there's nothing positive about the pandemic, but I will say it finally brought to light not only how central broadband is to full participation in American life, but also how many people don't have it. And it is both. I know the focus here is going to be rural and it's critical, but many people in urban America don't have it either, largely because it's very expensive. And the affordability problem is also a problem in rural America as well. You have the availability problem of, there's no network. And clearly that's something that needs to be resolved. But the affordability problem, how do we ensure that every American can afford broadband, is critical. 2 other issues that I want to raise that I think cut across both rural and urban America is, number one, is the digital literacy issue. We all take for granted that, we just pop our computers open and get on the World Wide Web and we know where to go and what to do. Well, for a lot of people, that's not the case. They don't actually know the difference between a browser and a search engine and email. And so they need that literacy. The other thing that I think is really, really important is the lack of simple applications that help many of the same population understand the importance and relevance and the ability to use broadband. So, my daughter is downstairs in her class, and it just boggles my mind the numerous different platforms she has to use. I mean, even she's a 16-year-old kid, right? She should have known this one from the day she was born. Even she has difficulty with uploading her homework to some of the programs. And she has 4 or 5 different platforms she has to use to get her work done. There's got to be something that's more simple, more streamlined. So we shouldn't forget, while having the infrastructure is critical, and being able to afford is critical, there also needs to be applications that are simple to use. So those of us who are not so savvy in how to use the web will be able to use the internet as well. So let's not forget the applications as well as the infrastructure.
And I do want to come back to you, Gigi, in a little bit on the affordability, because I think that is a really big issue that people don't really understand. But before we do that, particularly given, the theme of our discussion here today also includes diversity. And I think that one of the things that's always interesting to me is when people picture rural America and think about who lives in these rural communities, I think they have this stereotypical image in their head. And to be very frank, rural America does not equal white America necessarily. 22% of rural residents are people of color, and estimates are now suggesting that 15 to 20% of the LGBTQ community lives in rural America. And we see that these numbers are growing, particularly because there might be a little bit of a rural renaissance that is going now that we find that people can live and work and study from wherever they may be. So, Seth and Catherine, I'm going to kind of turn to you and say, what do the customers look like that you serve? What are you seeing out there in the field? Catherine?
98% of Sacred Wind's customers in our study area are Navajo. Nearly half of our customers living outside of our study area in nearby rural towns are Hispanic. And so then within those groups, we serve elderly individuals, large families, small families, single parent families, raising, grandparents raising their grandchildren, and even families caring for a disabled person in their home. Some of our customers even prefer to speak their native language of Navajo, which is why we employ Navajo-speaking customer service representatives. And I think I even heard that one of our customers was a Navajo code talker.
And you've just painted a different picture of rural America, right? So Seth, how about up for you? And again, you represent all of these community-based providers that come together under the network that you run in North Dakota. What do you see?
So I'm going to speak more on a statewide basis. DCN ourselves, we just serve commercial and governmental entities. Our owners, most of them are cooperatives. They serve the rest of the geography in the state. And from a demographic standpoint, North Dakota is 84%, not nearly as diverse as New Mexico. We have 84% white or Caucasian. We have 5% of our population is American Indian. 3.4% are Black or African American. 1.9% Hispanic. 1.8% Asian. We have seen over the past 10 years that number of diversity climb just because of the Bakken and people coming from all corners of the United States to find opportunity in North Dakota. With the oil downturn, obviously those numbers continue to fluctuate, but we are seeing other opportunities once people move here. And we're really proud of our state. We think it's a great place to live. And once people have the opportunity maybe to move out of a metropolitan area and then move into a small town and be part of a community where people are working together to solve problems, I think that people are wanting to stay here and find other opportunities. So we haven't seen an outflux of people. North Dakota continues to grow.
As we talk about some of that diversity, I do want to kind of stay on that a little bit. And Catherine, obviously, Sacred Wind, tribally run entity, the work that you all do. Tribal communities have traditionally been some of our nation's most economically underdeveloped, obviously underserved, a lot of challenges. Seth, I know that you've got some tribal areas up in North Dakota as well. Is there a way you can paint the picture of some of the challenges, and are there ways to better serve some of these tribal lands? Are there ways to kind of capture what Gigi's talked about in terms of digital literacy, connectivity, things that you're seeing on the ground? So I don't know. I'm gonna start with Seth and Catherine, but Gigi, I know you've got something to add to this discussion about tribal communities.
Catherine.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Seth. Yeah, I think to better serve tribal communities, a company must have a different business model. That's what's worked for Sacred Wind, and a different business model that allows them to operate different from the way that corporate telcos have traditionally operated. So it's got to be a business model that reinforces their culture, the culture that they're providing service to, and that addresses other sometimes very basic needs, such as providing bottled water during a pandemic. That's one of the things that we've done. Firewood, every winter we provide firewood. We help with that with the chapters in our service territory and outside as well, and canned food during hard winters. So just as important, though, the broadband industry needs to make sure to include tribal voices at the table. And so as an example, Sacred Wind created a Navajo advisory board comprised of chapter presidents from some of the chapters in our service territory. And we meet quarterly with these chapter presidents so we can share our infrastructural and service plans. And then in turn, we also take what we get information from the chapter presidents as to what's important in their communities and how to best acquire right of way or promote our services. And we invite them to address just broadband needs in general.
Seth, anything from your perspective?
Well, I'm going to speak as it relates to COVID and engaging with the tribal entities, getting these kids connected, and some of the challenges that we saw. I think one of my observations was there was availability was one issue that we had to overcome, and adoption is the second. And identifying and really defining those clearly. Having the broadband, having the fiber running down the street doesn't, and I think Gigi kind of talked about it before, it was digital literacy, making sure that everybody's comfortable with, okay, can you bring the internet into your home in a safe, controlled and parental controls and things like that. I think that was part of why we have some adoption issues as we were trying to get these students connected. And then outreach, making sure that, whether we were putting it on the radio, some of the identifying where the students were living on the tribal grounds was a little bit of a challenge that we had to work through and say, okay, how do we engage with the school districts, with the tribal leaders, with the community leaders, and with the service providers that are the cooperative service providers that are serving that area. It really took people sitting down at the table and identifying specifically where we had gaps and how quickly we could solve and fill those gaps. And I think in North Dakota, we did a tremendous job. We identified approximately 2,000 students without broadband. And in a matter of 3 weeks, in the latter part of March, early part of April, we either got fiber to their house. Maybe it was just 100 feet that was left just to get their house lit. We had fiber running down the road. We had temporary drops. We had Wi-Fi hotspots where we set them up, maybe at the outside of the school or at the grocery store in certain cases. But it just using creativity and collaboration, it was amazing what we accomplished in a very short amount of time. I think we need to take that momentum and continue it forward as we come out of the pandemic, that we don't lose sight of what we did and how to continue the momentum.
And kudos to you, because what you did in North Dakota is mind-boggling. Gigi, you too, again, your work at the FCC, you looked at tribal communities. I know you were very, very focused on ensuring that all Americans, regardless of who they are, where they live, kind of curious to, any perspective you have on how to better capture and increase those numbers of connectivity on tribal lands in particular.
Yeah, it's interesting. I speak to tribal leaders and advocates, particularly there's a woman named Tracy Morris at Arizona State University at the American Indian Policy Institute. We talk about this a lot. And I want to kind of pull a thread that Catherine talked about, and that is ensuring that Native voices are at the table. I think a lot of times the tribes just feel like they're at the mercy of commercial entities and nobody's including them in the conversation. And I'm sorry to say that I think at this FCC, they've also felt left out. Like the consultations, in their opinion, that the FCC is supposed to have with the tribes have really not been particularly fruitful, and it's more like window dressing. So, sovereignty and the ability for self-government is critically important to Native peoples, and you've got to have them as decision makers at the table. And if their finances are good enough, actually building the networks themselves. I remember when I was at the Gila River, when I was at the FCC, I visited the Gila River reservation, and they own their own broadband ISP, and it was incredible the connectivity they had. Now they had, quite a bit of money from casinos and such, so they had the means. Not all tribes have the means, so I do think it's really, really important to have to have the tribes really as part of the decision makers, and if possible, as the actual stakeholders, or not stakeholders, but shareholders of any corporations that's serving their lands. The other thing that I find that, and this is not so much about fiber, it's more about spectrum, but let me just diverge for just a second. I think there's a great deal of frustration among the tribes about companies that get licenses to spectrum over their lands and then don't use it, right? They don't build out. It's not only over their lands, it's over, lands that are more economically fruitful. So they build in those more economically fruitful places, but not on tribal land. So, there's a real push for kind of like a use it or lose it. If you're not going to build on our land, then we want the ability to build. So that kind of gets back to, the more we can empower tribes to serve themselves, or to at least have them at the table where a commercial entity is serving, I think is really, really critically important. Let me just also pull a thread that Seth talked about. He didn't say the word, but I think it's an important word to talk about, and that's trust, right? When I was at the FCC, I went to Kansas City and went to a bunch of Section 8 housing. It was not tribal land. It was largely African-American population. And Google was providing gigabit fiber for free, and people were not taking it. And they said, well, nobody gives anything away for free. And is the government going to spy on us? Is Google going to spy on us? And it actually took Google to get smart and hire people from the community to go around to their neighbors and say, no, this is a good thing, not a bad thing. So, trust can be a barrier for communities who are traditionally underrepresented. And communities of color are disproportionately on the wrong side of the digital divide for a variety of reasons, not just cost. It's just systemic racism and, and in housing and banking and in other areas. So that trust factor, making sure that the community is bought in, I think is critically important.
So Gigi, let's just stay on this a little bit. So you previously served at the FCC. I think you are so well equipped to be thinking about, what are the ways this new FCC can help promote diversity and help connect more Americans, rural areas, low-income areas, address affordability, address adoption. Love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Well, let me say first, the FCC can do a lot, but it can't do it all. Okay, so if you want to ask me a question about what I think what the administration should be doing, I've got a good answer for that as well. So obviously, the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission for the uninformed, is the central agency that is tasked with ensuring that communications networks are available and affordable for all Americans. And that's not just because that's their mission, that's the law. So let me talk a little bit about what I think the FCC should do. And please indulge me because it's a little bit of a long answer. So there's a lot that needs to be done. So let me see if I can get through it quickly. So first and foremost, the FCC has to reinstate its legal authority to overstate the broadband market and close the digital divide. I'm not going to get into all the details, but this is just to say that right now, the legal rationale for providing funds to broadband providers like your members, Shirley, or providing subsidies for poor people and communities of color and schools and libraries is really at risk. And the FCC needs to basically reinstate the authority that the Trump FCC has taken away. So there's no question, nobody can go to court and challenge money for deployment or for adoption or anything else. So that's number one. And then Congress needs to make that authority clear. All right, the Congress needs to step in and say, we're going to end this battle that's been going on for 18 years and say, the FCC can close the digital divide. It can protect consumers. It can promote competition in the broadband space. Okay, very quickly, the FCC has to fix its broadband maps. Okay, right now the maps that purport to show who has broadband and who doesn't are grossly inaccurate. They way overstate who has broadband. The good news is Congress just gave $65 million for the FCC to do that. That needs to be they can do that even with a 2-2 commission. They need to move forward on that. You can't make good policy with bad maps. Third, they have to raise the speeds that are considered broadband. I talked about this before. 25 down and 3 up is not broadband anymore. not when you have multiple people in a household, trying to use multiple devices using very sophisticated applications like this one. I think 100 symmetrical is the baseline of what the speed should be. And when the FCC sets a speed, that is a determinant for who gets funding, for whether they should do more to promote broadband availability and adoption. So it's very, very important to fix the speeds. I think the FCC needs to clarify that E-rate funds, remember those are the funds that go to school and libraries, can be used for home connectivity or for Wi-Fi on school buses or anything beyond the boundaries of a school or a library. That's something that this FCC has refused to do. They could have done it, in my opinion, even without Congress acting, but they haven't. They need to strengthen the Lifeline program, it's too hard right now to get the Lifeline subsidy. It's a tiny subsidy, $9.25. I'm hoping that Congress is going to pass on a permanent basis a $50 a month broadband credit. They just did it on an emergency basis for COVID. I hope they do it on a permanent basis. They need to take a long, hard look at the winners of and Shirley, I know you can agree with me on this, of the last auction it was supposed to be $16 billion to go to broadband, for broadband deployment in rural communities. The money went largely to companies that I think there's a consensus, a bipartisan consensus, are unlikely to build the networks they promised. Again, don't want to get into too much detail, but I think this FCC needs to, on the front end, if they're going to give away tens of billions of dollars, they need to make sure that the people that are going for that money, that get that money, can actually build high capacity, high speed networks. I think that's critically important. Okay, two more things. The FCC needs to permanently expand the rural healthcare program. That's money that goes to healthcare facilities, mental health facilities, hospitals for broadband, to include urban healthcare facilities as well. I will give credit to this FCC. They did, for COVID, expand the program to urban centers as well. And finally, and this one could take up the whole hour itself, but I won't. The FCC has got to fix the program that funds the deployment in high-cost areas, funds Lifeline, funds E-rate, funds rural healthcare. It's called the Universal Service Fund. And right now, too few companies are contributing to that fund. So what has happened is 30% of those companies' interstate revenues is going to fund all these programs, these critical programs I just talked about. That is not sustainable. It's always been the third rail for the FCC, but the time has come to get others to contribute to that program. And for me, everything is on the table. You want to talk about the tech companies contributing. Clearly, broadband companies should be contributing, in my opinion. But right now, it's shrunk. The fund has shrunk so much. The only companies that are contributing are those that provide plain old telephone service and voice over IP telephone service and mobile telephone service. That is a shrinking pot, and too few companies are bearing the burden. It's not sustainable. So that's my list. It's a long one, which tells you there's an awful lot of work to do.
I got tired just thinking about the work we have to do ahead of us here. So thank you.
It is exhausting, but exhilarating.
So, one of the things that has really struck me just listening to everybody is you're all doing these amazingly powerful things that are leading towards action and changing people's perceptions and changing the way they see themselves. And one of the things, again, this conference is really devoted to is thinking, how do we get beyond the conversations? How do we get beyond the talk? And really start thinking about what is the action that can be taken, and one of the things that I think each one of you has something very unique to share is thinking about what the folks listening to this discussion can take away and what might they be able to do to support, more Americans getting connected, more people being online, a more diverse collection of people accessing information at all times. So one of the things I thought I would do is kind of, as we kind of think through that, what is, if there's one thing you want the audience to take away from this panel today, if there's one piece of advice where you're saying, it may be somebody who's sitting in local government or some state government or a community organization, what is the one takeaway that might engage them. And Catherine, I probably you're probably sad that I'm picking on you to go first, but love to hear what you have.
Well, thank you. And all of the items that Gigi touched on, I find to be quite refreshing because, and it may not necessarily be something new, Gigi, but I just want to thank you for bringing those things up. And those are things that can be done, right? Those are things that can be done at the federal level. And one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking, Shirley, is we need more people in telecommunications. There's it's an industry that is growing. There's a lot of opportunity in the telecommunications world. And within that world, there's a lot of different things that an individual can do when they have a career in telecommunications. And so for our younger generations to look at telecommunications as a possible career and to study along those lines to get degrees that would aid them in a telecommunications career, I think will further our goals that we have for telecommunications in this country. The broadband solutions for rural communities will differ from one to another, but working in coordination with the community. I really feel like solutions are readily available. We have to listen to each other. We have to invite each other to the table. Ultimately, we all want the same thing, right? We all want the pursuit of happiness, and we know that broadband is a key to getting all of these different types of things in life that we want, whether it be jobs or education or equality or healthcare. And we see that now because of the pandemic so much more. So I think that's what I wanted to add.
That is great. So Seth, we're ready to take action. What work are you going to put on our plate here?
Well, I can just tell you in North Dakota and growing up on the farm, when we had to get something done, we worked together. We got together with our neighbors to do it. When we met the pandemic in North Dakota, there was collaboration, and it was between state, local leaders, local school districts, local citizens, identifying which kids, taking that state mandate up to the federal level. Gigi touched upon it with the FCC. If we have confidence in the policies that are being made federally, and we roll them down to the state level and then down to the local level and give the service providers the confidence that they need to make the investments. These are not small investments. They're millions of dollars. And in a lot of cases in rural America, the business case doesn't stand on its own. And so though I'm for competition in general, I think what we have to do is realize that we can't have multiple fiber connections running down maybe a 12 or 15 mile stretch of gravel road to serve one farm. What we have to do is use those dollars most cost effectively to get that farmer, rancher, whoever it is in the United States, connectivity at an affordable rate. And so I think collaboration, getting everybody around the table, talking about the specific challenges, and then making decisions, not just talking about it, making a decision and putting the plow in the ground and building it. And I think we've done a tremendous job of that in North Dakota. The 14 rural cooperatives, independent telephone companies have just truly have a history of doing that for almost 100 years. And universal service was where it all came out of, and we're still in business. But I think a lot of the points made today are valid, and we need to keep talking about them.
So Seth, before I let you go entirely, one of the things, you talk a lot about collaboration and partnership. One of the things I think that you could share that I think would be a really helpful takeaway for folks is what you did in North Dakota to make sure that 98% of your school children were connected within a month of folks going home. That is astounding. And when I share that with people, I think they think I'm making that number up. But I think if you wouldn't mind just sharing a few of the tidbits of what you did, because I think that's a really important lesson.
Yeah. So DCN has the state contract to provide a gigabit internet connection to every school in the state. And so that connection was already there. But then once we saw the pandemic coming, it was a little bit later in North Dakota. It was March 20th when we saw our first case. But coming into that, we met with the Department of Public Instruction, the governor's office, and the North Dakota IT department, the statewide IT buying department who has the contract to buy these circuits, and then they E-rate them. Well, we sat down and said, okay, what is the internet demand going to do once everybody goes home? Are we going to see the usage just drop at the schools and the banks and it just shift to the home? Or are we going to see the internet being used at both if they're talking to a server? So we got together and we started planning for increased bandwidth demand, which happened. Our bandwidth increased by 40% in just 3 weeks. And then the next thing was, okay, when we send all these kids home, how many of them are not going to have internet? In North Dakota, we identified 77,000 addresses where we had kids from K through 12. And of those 77,000, we identified 2,000 of them that we knew did not have internet. And so in just a few short weeks, we had the local telephone companies, those rural broadband service providers, working with the local school districts. So that's where we kind of separated and said, okay, the state did their part, DCN did their part. Now the work really happens at the local level. And they work to get those students connected, to work with the school districts to make sure that they had the connectivity that they needed. And yeah, in just 3 weeks, we connected to 1,760 of those homes with whatever type of a hybrid of connectivity. Fiber to a lot of them. We had some wireless solutions that we deployed. We had a couple where the student did end up having to ride with his or her mother to work, but we made sure that they were connected in some way, shape, or form.
Again, it's a really impressive and powerful story. So Gigi, love to kind of, again, your takeaway, but also your takeaway with an eye towards, again, new leadership coming in, new FCC, thoughts to share.
My main thought is if we're going to get everybody online, it's got to be all hands on deck. And Seth started to talk about this, right? So I actually think that there needs to be either an Office of Universal Broadband or a Broadband Czar in the White House, whose job it is to bring together federal agencies, not just the FCC. I mean, with more time, I could tick off all the agencies: Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, Health and Urban Development, Ed, right? That could have a role. The Agriculture Department has a rural utilities service that gives out money for broadband and loans for broadband. Department of Commerce. So there's multiple federal agencies, but also we have to involve the states, right? The states are increasingly getting involved. 35 states have offices of digital inclusion, and a bunch of states give money for broadband deployment as well. Congress, industry, philanthropy. I get a lot of calls from philanthropies wanting to know what they can do, to work on digital inclusion and digital equity. Consumer groups that represent communities of color and Native groups, digital inclusion advocates, and there are all over the country, local government. Everybody has got to have a role because the federal government can't just do it by itself. Let me just give a shout out to the locals because they know they know their communities. They know who doesn't have broadband. Right? They know where they live. They know where to find them. They know what kind of media will reach them. So again, it's got to be all hands on deck. And I do think I'd love to see somebody in the White House whose business it is to work with all these different interests and set a blueprint for closing the digital divide in 4 years. Now that's very ambitious. But you remember, we had a national broadband plan in 2010 that was supposed to get broadband to everybody in 10 years, and we are so far from that. So we need to have an administration for whom this is a huge priority, and obviously it's complicated when you have, the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, and a crisis of democracy. But it still needs to be a priority, and if it is a priority, I think at the end of Joe Biden's first term. This could get done.
I'm going with your optimism. All right. So just to kind of wrap of what we've heard today, connectivity is key, drives not just the economics, but certainly quality of life. I heard speed is important. Let's make sure, just enough isn't good enough. Collaboration, thinking about who people can partner with, talk to, diverse voices around the table. I think you all made a real point about how important that is. And I'm just going to conclude our wrap up with all hands on deck. So I think this is all hands on deck issue. So I want to thank Catherine, Gigi, Seth, so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Thanking all of you who tuned in to the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. Really important that you've decided to spend some of your time listening to these important topics. You've been watching the Rural Renaissance, how diverse communities get connected and why it matters. And this has been a part of the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. So I'd like to thank you for watching today. I'd like you to check out the other topics that are available because there's so many interesting voices from all genres, genders, geographies, topics, you name it, check it out. And for more of these conversations, you can go ahead and visit the www.nonobviousdiversity.com. You'll be able to see all of the listings there. And the official hashtag for the conference is #NonObviousDiversity. So again, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Shirley Bloomfield, and remember to always stay non-obvious. Thanks so much.